Hi there, I'm Sebastian from Tennis and welcome to our new series Smarter Tennis. In this series, we want to explore how you can use data and technology to take your tennis to a new level. We'll be talking with people around the tennis world who are leading the way in using technology in tennis. To stay up to date on upcoming episodes, go to tennis.com/smartertennis. In this first episode, we'll be speaking with Shane Liyanage from Australia. Shane is one of the leaders in the world in using data to uncover actionable insights in tennis. He works through his own company, Data-Driven Sports Analytics, with several ATP and WTA players. Stay tuned if you want to know how data is used on the highest levels of tennis and how it could elevate your game as well. Shane, welcome to the show, and would you like to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your background and how did you end up working as a data analyst?
And thanks for inviting me onto the show. Great privilege to be on the show with you. In terms of my background, it was I'd say it was a very a strange way that I got into this sort of tennis analytics. I worked in data and reporting roles for a decade, really, in various industries. So in the Australian mining industry, in the health industry, in the financial sector as well. And I always was in data visualization, data roles, predictive analytics sort of roles, and had a passion for tennis. I played it till the Australian Money Tour level, which is the lowest tier of their professional rank. So I wasn't a good player, but one thing that I always did before playing matches was try and evaluate my next opponent, take some data from my matches. So I always had that inquisitive mind to try and better myself, knowing that I had gaps in other areas that I could maybe bridge the gap with other players. So I always had that data head, I suppose. And then maybe a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, had a couple of good friends who were taking their squad of players to a regional tournament. And I just thought, well, let's try and capture some data. And so I went there and helped and just wanted to see how he did it. He had a notebook and he was trying to watch his players and give encouragement, put something in a notebook. And then he went home, put it in Excel, and I told him that there's better ways to do this than that. So we initially started with just cameras and then going back and then putting it in Excel and charting it and then giving him some reports and graphs to help him. And that's how it sort of started. And I suppose I've always been sort of looking to drive some efficiency because that was a very manual process. And it just so happened one of the tour coaches saw some of the work that I was doing, and they wanted me to trial with their player a couple of years ago. So Federico Placidelli from Italy, he wanted me to work with him on the team of Thomas Fabiano, and then that was successful. And since then, I've been fortunate enough to work with a few more players.
Sounds very interesting. And going back to your history before working with tennis data and tennis numbers. So did you have some kind of education for it, or did you just, for the other industries that you worked, so was it just, your interest for them, or did you have some kind of formal education for that as well?
Yeah, so I actually came out of uni with a commerce and law degree. So I worked in law for a couple of years, but I majored on the commerce side. I majored in statistics and accounting. So I always had a financial sort of numbers side to it. And then once I was working, I also did a data science qualification as well. So I think it just so happened as I was working, I got into a lot of roles with business intelligence tools, so Tableau, your Power BIs, and just pulling data from various sources and providing insights. And I think the key takeaway for me in that work was I was never the subject matter expert. So when I was in the mining industry doing work for them, I knew nothing about iron ore, I knew nothing about gold. But I was working with experts, making sure I spent a lot of time with them, understanding what everything meant, and then pulling insights for them with my skills, with sort of connecting the different data sources. So yeah, I had a lot of experience with a lot of different data sets, and I think that when I went to sort of work with tennis data sets, I was immediately I felt like, well, at least I have some level of subject matter expertise here. But yeah, that's I suppose going back to your question. Yes, I did have some formal education, but I'd say experience working with different data was probably the key foundation to me being able to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah, perfect. Makes sense. And going back to your own playing times when you played and prepared for the matches. So back in the days, how did you do it? How did you try to, scout your opponents and look at the data like?
Yeah. So for listeners might not see, I'm not a very tall person. I'm very quite kind of short. So so one of the big things for me was one of my assets was I was quick, but I didn't have a huge first or second serve. My groundies weren't big, so. So that's just to give you an idea of sort of my gameplay was really driven around speed oriented, sort of hitting more balls back. So in terms of going back and looking at opponents, I'd always look at trying to see if I could find video. If I couldn't find video, I would talk to other people in the draw that I knew that may have played them, just to get a bit of an insight. Sometimes they thought I was a bit of a pest, always calling and asking about it. But I always found that was just doing a little bit of prep work and not spending hours and hours, but doing maybe 20 minutes, just finding out a little bit about how they play, if they had a preference to serve a certain way, if they were a big server, should I stand a couple of meters further behind to return serve? So just trying to have a little bit of a plan going into the match really helped me. I think while I feel I'm studious and academic outside, when I'm playing a match of tennis, I don't think very clearly. I get too maybe emotional in there. So if I am ready with a plan, it helps me focus. So I often had a notebook or something written down. So I'll try and read that just so I kept focused. So yeah, for me, it was critical to the success I had. I always felt I was never the most talented player. I was probably one of the least talented players, but I had a lot of wins against players that were more talented, and I put it down to preparation.
And was it more just like preparing, or did you have some data sets already done then, or was it more just like looking at your opponents, or did you have some actual video or numbers that you went through?
Yes, so where we could get video. So look, when I was playing, so this is probably the early mid 2000s. Well, YouTube, there wasn't a lot of footage on YouTube, but you could find some footage, and often you could find some footage at some of the competitions. Maybe had some full matches that they put online as well. So you could get a little bit of footage. If I could get the footage, I'll just have a quick look and just go, okay, he's serving, on the juice points, he's always serving this way. So it'd be very simple stats that I'd pick up and I'd write down. I didn't even put it in something like Excel or anything like that. But yeah, that's how I sort of collect the data. And then it was a lot more qualitative. So you just have a look at how he plays, or you listen to someone that's played them and they would give their assessment. And that's how, in terms of when I was playing, that's how I based some of the analysis or preparation for me.
The reason why I'm asking is because, from my point of view, when I'm looking at it and listening to you, let's have your view. Do you think that you were an outlier back then, and is this typical still on that level, and maybe other level, like let's more in grassroots level of tennis rather than in the top 100 or top 300 in the ATP WTA level? And yeah, so and also like broadening the question a little bit more is how do you see is there some general trends you see happening in the very professional level tennis, and then some national level competitive players, and then very grassroots like club level league matches? Do you see people doing this, and what are the trends in uh, utilizing and taking the advantage of data and numbers and videos?
Yeah, I think back then I would say, look, I wasn't the only one, but I was maybe one of a few. There wasn't many that did that. And I must admit, I played a few sports and I did the same thing in the other sports as well. So I think it just happened to be, so, perhaps my personality. I love that. Even watching other sports, I always, the first thing I look at is the stats after the match. It kind of, it's just how, I enjoy that side of it. But yeah, going back to your question, I don't think there was a lot that did that. I'd say it's probably the players, and even going to the tour level players that I'm working with, they're not that big on it. I think they value it, they want to use it, but it's not the first thing they think about. I think they might think about, what do they need to eat before a match, the physio. The data is something that I think the good coaches and the analysts are trying to make important to the player, and that they're more receptive to it than they used to be. But I don't think it's the first thing, and I don't think if a player didn't have a coach or an analyst on their team, I don't think they would do that. I don't think, one, they probably don't have the time, but I haven't seen many players that are motivated to do that at this stage. And that being said, there's definitely outliers. I've worked with a coach and one of the students in his squad. So he plays tennis as well. But he also volunteers and he tags all the matches of his squad basically. And so he's very interested in the data side. But again, I don't think there's many that probably have that same interest.
Yeah. And I guess that for players, as you mentioned, it's a lot of work, and there are many priorities to focus on before tournaments and matches. And then coaches, probably it's easier to digest and use time on that and take coaching cues and tips from there. Might be a weird question, but where do you, I mean, obviously you come from a data analyst background, but where do you see where the priority should be? Like, how big, asset is to look at those numbers, and what kind of benefit and gain players and coaches would, and maybe two different aspects. What do the coaches get, and what do the players get, and is there a difference between the two?
Yeah. So I'll try to answer that in parts. In terms of the value, I think an honest answer is I probably, it's very hard to put a value. I think the value is different for each player. Certain players will find more value in it than others. In terms of, I do think the value is more for the coach than necessarily the athlete, because I think, I find the relationships with the coach for me work the best, where we almost go through a filtering stage where I present an analysis, we sit down together, they learn a few things, but then they'll go, okay, I can use that later, I can use this for this match, this one I don't think our player can action it, but they're learning as they're doing it, and the player just gets a little bit. So it probably doesn't answer your question exactly, but I feel the value is more for the coach than the player. Ultimately, the player is the one that has the success and wins the prize money, gets further in the draw and all of that. But I feel like the data and the analysis helps the coach be a better coach, and that's the first thing. And then the player gets the benefit after that. So, I mean, that's my experience. It may be different for other teams, but that's how it's sort of worked for me.
And my background is actually in basketball. I played basketball professionally in the first division in Finland and in the junior national teams. And we looked at numbers all the time, like from rebounds to points to steals to shooting percentages and everything. And the game was analyzed, and I think it's still analyzed, and even more all the time through numbers. And the numbers can give you a lot of information. And when I'm looking at more like from grassroots levels of tennis, I think that there would be a major, benefit for players if they would have the tools and also the understanding, not only the numbers, but like the both the tools and understanding how to benefit from that. And trying to approach it from top down, that how the pro players do it and what would be the implications for the lower level players to benefit from there. But maybe can you walk us through, like, how do you actually work, like what is in detail and in actual, how is the process, like if you have a player that you work with or a coach, you know, how do you prepare when you do the briefing session that you mentioned, and the report, what kind of work you do before the report, and what does the report contain, and then what is the conversation, the briefing, when you talk with the coach, like I have no idea, so that would be very interesting to hear the whole process. Like, how do you
Yeah.
get into that point?
I can probably categorize, I suppose, the arrangements that generally, you got your pre-tournament work. So let's say, like now we're heading into the off season, where you've got 6, 7, 8 weeks where you've got a big amount of time to do a lot of things. So during this time, we do some analysis on things that often patterns of play or things like that, where you've got a bit more time to practice and implement something. That's what we'd use this sort of a block of time for, and even getting data from GPS or movement or some sort of trackers, and almost driving those sort of longer term, medium term, longer term changes would be a period like now. When you're going into a tournament, it's a little bit different. It's I'd say, so sorry, one step back. Before going into a tournament, the focus is almost 100% on your player. If anything, if you're looking at an opponent, it's more from a benchmarking perspective. So you might say, let's say, this year we worked with Ons Jabeur. We might say, okay, Ons plays like this. She uses a slice, but the benchmark in slicing is Ash Barty. So outside of a competition, we might compare it to Ash Barty and what she's doing, but still the focus is more on Ons, on our player. Going into the tournament, it sort of changes. You're starting to look at your opponent. So the first thing we'd do is look for the draw. The moment we have the draw, we know who our opponents are, and we've got a database of matches that we've charted of most of the ATP and WTA. So if we're fortunate, our player is playing someone that's already in our database. If not, we need to try and find video. So usually through player accreditation or through some sort of arrangement with the federation that with our players in, we get access to the video of our player and sometimes the opponent, and we will tag that, and then using the data from that, we'd produce a game plan for that match. And then I suppose if you're thinking about during the match, I think my role would involve sort of watching the match, taking some notes down, and then immediately after the match, tag that match video and then talk to the coach. So almost that review after the match. This is what happened. This is what the data's showing. I'll pick out some key vision to go, this happened, and this is the footage. We'd probably focus on a little bit more if our player lost, because we have more time. But if our player won, I'd pick out 1 or 2 key things looking forward to the next match. Yeah. And then it's the same process. Then you look at who you're playing next, and you keep going forward. So in tournaments, very different to outside of a tournament, how we'd sort of do that.
Yeah, and outside tournament, is there a lot in the data that you find in order to improve players' game, like different areas, ground stroke, serves, whatever volley that might be? Are those typically easy to spot from the data, or only from the naked eye? How do you typically come with the biggest aha experiences and the key learnings that, okay, this is actually we need to focus on? And do the coaches and players typically agree on it immediately with the findings that you come up with, or no?
Yeah, I would say so. In terms of how do we get the data, it would be primarily it's through sort of tagging, but at some of the other events that we've done, so we've done some events at the Australian Money Tour level. We were fortunate enough to actually work with a smart court technology, Zenniz, where that collected the data for us. So that had positional data, it had speed data, trajectory, sort of information. Whenever there's a device like that, it makes my job easier. It means I don't have to tag the whole match and spend a lot of that sort of manual labor time tagging the match, and I can focus more on the analysis side. But whatever it means, we would capture the data, and we'd get things like positional data, speed data, movement data, and then it's a matter of really doing the analysis and seeing, each player's different. Like you might look at areas where they're comfortable, so zones of the court that they're doing quite well, and then we'd look at sequences as well. Like let's say, is the forehand down the line, is that a good 2-shot sequence? Or if you wanted a 3-shot sequence, you'd have a look at if you had these 3 shots in combination, what's your probability of winning the point? And then you'd look at areas of the court, returning serve. Is it more advantageous to be, in a certain location than the other? But you basically use all the data to try and get an opinion on that. And then I think the key is probably to then simplify that for a coach. So often what you do, you'd visualize it in something that they're comfortable with. So often it's a tennis court or something tennis related that you can quite simply put in front of them and they'll understand. And then you've got to explain it. So I think the soft skills are probably one of the big things for an analyst working, particularly with sporting organizations, where often the coaches, they don't necessarily have a mathematics or a data background. So to be able to communicate to them simply is critical. I've seen some really brilliant data scientists who work in sports, and their analysis is amazing, but that connection, they lose it when they're talking to the coach. So I can't stress that enough. That communication soft skills is really important. But yeah, going back to the final part of your question, there are times where they don't agree with your analysis. A good example with Thomas Fabiano, who I worked with in 2019. The coach, there was a pattern which we looked at shot sequence data, and there was a pattern of play where we wanted him to hit I wanted him to hit off forehand instead of him hitting a cross court backhand. And his view was, particular player was, I have a great backhand, and he has a decent backhand. I'm not saying it's a bad backhand, but we thought he could create more opportunity, like more options, if he went and hit it off forehand. And the data showed that, but they didn't believe it. So had to show them the video. So basically combine the data and the video and the explanation, and finally they bought into it. But sometimes they don't. It's I think you can't have an ego with these things. At the end of the day, you've got data, and you're putting it in front of the coach, but the coach does know the player better, or the player does know, I suppose, himself a little bit better. And you can't necessarily change everything, but I think having it there is more important, or is still very important.
Yeah. And when that kind of realization happens that it actually works, does it affect on the practice court as well? The findings that you get, are those applied in the practice session in short term or long term? How do you see that link?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are gains where you can have a short-term benefit. So something like an example would be serve direction patterns. So you might be playing a particular player, and they've got the data showing they've got a weakness returning a certain type of serve. That might be something a player's practiced so many times that they can implement quite quickly on a court. They'll still practice it 1 or 2 times in their practice session, but they don't need a lot to go to that plan. But then there's some longer term things. So that example of a sequence where we wanted him to hit an off forehand from a certain part of the court, it needed them to practice it a fair bit. It needed to actually get him physically able to run around his backhand continuously for a long period of time. Like he could be playing 5 hours. So it was it demanded some physical work as well. It wasn't just hitting balls. So yes, there are those categories of insights where you need a block of time, and that's why the off season's a really good one, where you have a big chunk of time to do some of those or practice some of those more longer term insights.
And what's your view? How many players on the top level, let's say top 100, how many of them use data analyst like yourself, or looking at the numbers? So what's the
Yeah.
current situation?
Look, I think in some shape or form, and I'm definitely saying all the men 20, the top 20, use it in some shape or form. The arrangements are different. So some of them have, similar to me, like have an analyst on the team, and the coach sort of outsources that sort of analysis, and then they work sort of within the team. Then you've got other arrangements where the coach has actually just gone to a third-party software company, or data company, and the data company just shoots something back, and the coach interprets it and presents it to the player. There's sort of federations as well. So some of the players can tap into the in-house analytics teams of federations. So there's probably a few different other examples as well. But I think in some shape or form, all the top 20 are using data. I was fortunate enough this year to work with the WTA team, and I met about 30 analysts, sort of all conversed with them at various times, and that's probably more than it's been if you compare to 2 years ago. And I feel like if you talk to me in 2 years' time, that number will be even higher. And I no longer think it's top 20. The athletes I worked with, so On started around 80 in the world. And Thomas was around 90 when we started. So it's no longer the top 20, top 30. There are players outside the top 50, outside the top 100 that are looking to get some sort of data insights as part of their sort of training.
Yeah. And when I'm thinking of, for example, competitive juniors, and not sure how much they use nowadays data, and from let's say from 13 to 15 years old, upwards, that if there would be a culture already placed that they could benefit from the data and have it in their DNA, whether for the coaches or the players, and what kind of impact that would have. And do you see that there is a trend that younger players would start adopting data already early, and the might be a difficult question, but what the key benefits there is, like, is there some low-hanging fruits for younger players or club level players that they could start understanding and benefiting from the data?
Yeah, I think so. I think you touched on it earlier, the ability to get some insights and then be able to compare to like their idol or the benchmark in a category. Like you might hit certain backhands and then go, okay, well, what was Novak Djokovic hitting, and that comparison is something that sort of using data and using smart courts really allows junior athletes sort of that readily available access to data, which previously wasn't available. You had to pay for a really expensive Hawkeye court, and really it was probably not something most parents were willing to do. So now being able to get that data is key for that part. But I also think from a coaching perspective, it helps the coaches as well. They can maybe focus a little bit more on some of the technical parts, knowing that they've got data and they've got vision already being captured as well. So I think, I'm probably going too much about the devices, but I think the fact that these devices out there, it's going to not only help the players, but help the coaches maybe focus on some of the more key things in developing a player. Because and then they've just got some fact behind it as well. Sometimes intuition, you can be misled by your intuition. So the ability to have something that is factual evidence sitting behind it, it actually helps develop the coach, develop the player as well. So I think for a grassroots level, it's actually it's quite an important addition to tennis to have sort of more analytical tools available. I would have loved it when I was playing. If I had access to this, I would be every match I played would be on this court. Every training session, I would have the data and I'd look at it. But and I think that's anyone that's got that self improvement drive, I think will subscribe to that sort of or having that sort of data available.
Definitely. Would you have any tips, like assuming that you would have a smart cord available and you could use it, like for goal setting, what kind of metrics do you would typically recommend to measure and look at and monitor the progress, how you develop? What would be your top three numbers that are biggest, that has biggest impact to the game and are somewhat easy to measure and understand?
Yeah, I think the ability to hit certain locations in the court, I think it's a key one. Sort of even at a grassroots level, you want to. I think it doesn't. I'm not saying you have to hit the line or any specific point, but just if you say you're going to hit this spot in the court, the ability to know that you're actually hitting it or coming close to hitting it, I think is important. I think having the speed spin is always useful. It gives you some context on how you're hitting the ball, and you can maybe do a bit of a progress report. You're having a look at when you're hitting it at the start of the year compared to 6 months down the track compared to 12 months. Just it can give you some really good indication on how you're progressing with certain areas of your game. I think, and then it does vary. I mean, for me growing up, I'm thinking a key part of it was just with my groups and everything, just the margins. Like I almost wanted to have another tram line in terms of my margins. I just played with a lot more safety. So again, that to be able to measure, how many balls that I was hitting sort of within those margins was important. And movement data is really critical as well. I think particularly the longer you're playing, it'd be interesting to see, are you moving the same way as you were moving at the start of the match? It will give you some insights onto, all right, maybe you need to work harder at the gym. Maybe you need to, your cardio, your endurance. What can you do? Maybe it's fueling food that you need to sustain yourself in the match. But you can use data to provide you that sort of insight, so you can prepare yourself better.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions on that, what you said. First one being the locations where you're placing the balls. So is it like from more or less from anywhere from the court that where you need to be able to hit certain spots on your opponent's side, or from one specific place to another specific place or like a little bit more deeper on that? And what like does it vary from player to player and opponent to opponent, or is there some key like directions and placements that you see that are really crucial?
Yeah, it does vary from player to player, but in general, I think talking about the male tour, biomechanically, the forehand generates more pace than the backhand. So you want players, particularly on the men's tour, to try and use their forehand more. So the off forehand. So I'm talking that sort of for a right-hander, that the ad corner of the court. You want to measure how many forehands they can hit from there, whether it's an inside out forehand or whether it's inside in or going up the line. You want to be able to track that shot. Yeah, so and there's probably a few other ones, like it'd be interesting with for the backhand, the two-handed backhands, or even the single-handed, just the changes in direction. So from a cross-court ball, for them to go up the line, like getting some data on that, how successful they are, the speed of shot that they're able to generate off that. I think that to sort of combine speed and directional sort of information, I think, they're key areas. But it's a very hard one to answer, because I think every player is different. Like I've worked with some players that will play inside the court a lot, and some players that are playing 4, 5, 6 meters behind the baseline, and they're fine. Like, it's not a bad court position for them. So I think the shots required sort of vary depending on that.
Yeah. And what I've understood is that, you know, in order to win the point, there are many factors that, you know, count in, like the depth and the spin and the speed and the location and consistency and these kind of things. But if we go back to what you mentioned earlier, the speed, like how are you discussing with coaches and players like the shot speed? Is it just a number, or does it have a specific meaning? Like, obviously the harder you hit, but like, is it always that case? Or you know, any player on their practice, should they focus on, like, how much does the speed of the shots actually count, and what's the role of speed and measuring speed?
Yeah, so speed, it's and the first point I'd say, speed doesn't necessarily mean, like, faster speed doesn't necessarily mean good. There are situations where I've advised players to take the pace off. So particularly, I've got a couple of players that I'm working with that are not maybe the strongest defensive players, and for them, like slicing or taking the pace off and trying to get back into more central parts of the court is better than trying to either go for a winner or go back hard up the middle or something, because speed isn't always a good thing. So we do use estimations of speed with some of the charting we've got. So we've got time data, we've got location data. So based on that, we've estimated speed. That being said, that there are, I suppose, more precise tools. So smart court technologies that I think that they have more accurate sort of measurements for speed, which I think is great. But going back, I think, to your question around importance, I think it does give some context. Like, you might have a pattern of play that you want your player to play, but if you don't give that speed indication, you don't necessarily give them an idea of sorry, my phone's going off.
No problem.
If you don't give them the speed information, you don't necessarily they don't have that context. So they might go up the middle with a 3/4 pace ball, and that might that might not do the damage that you're looking for. So the example that I want to give is a very good pattern of play that actually has a lot of success, particularly on the WTA tour, is a return up the middle, but a return up the middle hard up the middle. So it's actually not a defensive. It's an attacking ploy, and it just gives no angle to your player. It doesn't give them time to react after the serve. It's quite effective, but you want to give a speed range for the player to hit it at. If you don't give them that, you kind of give them, they might go 3/4 pace ball, and it doesn't do the damage that you wanted that play to do. So it's quite an important sort of context. And spin's probably the same thing. You want to be able to tell your player, if you're going to attack a certain part of the court, you want to go with weight. You might go heavy and spin on one ball, and the next ball might be flat. And you just want to give them a number so they have some context. I think players are all familiar with RPM. They're all familiar with, the kilometers per hour or miles per hour. And they kind of know what their forehand speeds are already from data that's on Hawkeye or something. So if you give them a number, it'll click in their head a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think that the second serve return is a great example, and that you need to have some kind of range, and probably that range varies again from different levels, from professional level to amateur level, obviously. But like, probably the key takeaway there is that the harder you can return that second serve in the middle, that there's no angles, no reaction time for the server to react. So that's the key takeaway. And for the players that you use are SmartCourt, for example, we provide the speed data, and for them to understand, like, depending again on their level, but like, what is a good if they're playing a match with 2 sets, and then we tell them that your forehand average speed is this. So, what's the context where they should evaluate it, like what is good and what is, bad? Or like my thinking would be that the faster it is, the better it is, because it takes time away from the opponent. Obviously, you need to look at consistency and how many errors you're making with your forehand, but like, and same thing with backhand, like the speeds. But is there like, are you looking at these kind of things with your players? Like, what's the average speed of your forehands in rally situations, and average, speed for your backhands, and what are the implications and takeaways that if and can you, by the way, can you get these speed numbers when you're tagging matches, or do you only get it if it's played on a Hawkeye court?
Yeah, so I'll try and answer that in a few parts, I suppose. I think in terms of tagging part, you can get estimates. So some of the tagging tools now, if you're capturing sort of location data, so where the ball's connected from, where it goes, you've got the time data from the frames, so you can estimate a speed from it. A lot of the tagging tools now provide that, so you can get data. You can get estimates based on that. It isn't 100% accurate, but it's an estimate. And in terms of my work, yeah, absolutely, I use it. I think one of the arrangements.
Is it good enough estimate in your opinion? Like it doesn't. I don't like. For example, when I'm using the Oura ring for sleeping, some people are saying that it's not 100%, but for me, if it's like 80% accurate, it's good enough. So the main just a follow-up question, sorry to interrupt you, but like is the speed data, the evaluation, is it, in your opinion, is it accurate enough?
It would, and I probably don't answer your question fully. It would depend on what you're using it for. So if you're trying to use that sort of for really precise, well, definitely for umpiring then no, then my answer is no. You need to get sort of a more precise sort of metric to do it. Hawkeye uses many cameras. The smart court devices have sensors and cameras, and so they're obviously more precise. So with a single camera on a tagging tool using estimation, it's never going to be at that level. But for me, it does add value because it's, as long as it's not completely out of the realms of it, still adds context to some of the other data. So the positional data, I feel like I always look at it with, if I didn't have it, or if I had an estimate that was maybe 75, 80% accurate, would it still add value? And if it's on the side of it's adding value, then I would present it. If it was a number where it was a lot below that, whereas maybe 50% accurate, 50% inaccurate, then you've probably got to toss it. You can't use it because it's too misleading. The players that I play with, I would use it as context for a lot of things. I think with speed, they're usually asking the question around, what's my serve speed like? What's my tee serve speed compared to my out wide serve speed compared to my body? They're asking that, but occasionally they do go, well, how was my forehand today compared to last time I played this player? And I think you mentioned before, generally, faster the forehand is better, but against certain matchups, you probably don't want to have a lot of pace. So if you're playing Federer, you don't want to give him pace. He's amazing at using your pace and redirecting it. So, there's certain players where it's better to take some pace off the ball.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And that's then the art to adapt and use different strategies, because tennis is such a complex sport and it has so many variables. But like generalizing and trying to understand the main features, like the harder the better, or the faster the better in general. There are only one Federer, but like obviously other players are good at some other players are good at using your pace as well. Uh, yeah, and then going back to the practice court, like if you see trends, have you made any observations with your players that, for example, you mentioned the serve speed in matches, and then also the speed of ground strokes. So has there been observations that, your shots are too soft or too slow? We need to go and work on them, and then on the practice court, measuring them and seeing that, if they're improved or not. Is this something that is on the priority ranking again, like from your point of view, or with the coaches that you talk to, is this a low priority that the fitness and mental and tactical side come first, or how important is this aspect, like discovering, like understanding your speed in match situations, and then go to the practice and measure it and trying to improve it? Does this take place at all?
Yeah, it definitely takes place now. With one of our players, it was something that we really focused on. That we found that they were able to get a lot of balls back. They moved well. They actually technically could hit every shot quite well, but what was ineffective was their forehand in particular. Wasn't hurting their opponent. It didn't have enough pace, didn't have enough spin. So it was I don't want to call it a nothing ball, but it was a ball that every time he hit it, the opponent kind of maybe from a defensive position came back to neutral because that their shot didn't do much. So it was something that the player, I think it wasn't just hitting balls. It was they needed to do a leg work, for instance, to be a bit stronger in their core and base. To be able to generate a bit more power. I'm no biomechanicist, so I'm sure that they would have got some sort of assistance there. They looked at things using the data, looked at things like racket string pattern. Can they get some assistance from a different string pattern or different tension to give some more pace? So it's definitely something, again, that off season is where a lot of players will be experimenting with that. Some players lengthen their racket to get a little bit more, it generates a bit more speed because of the length of the racket. Some people put lead weight, so the equipment changes happen, strings included in that, and then obviously the physical side to be able to be stronger, to be able to play, as well as the normal sort of hitting practice as well.
Sure. How about then a few more follow-ups? We discussed the speed now, but how about then the spin? How do you measure it? And similar kind of questions to this then to speed. That, how do you collect data, and how do you report this to coaches and players, and how do you apply it in matches and practices? Just tell me if I ask too many questions at once, but like you get the main idea of the question.
No, I do. Look,
how to benefit from there.
Yeah, spin is a lot more, in my opinion, more estimate. And if there's any coaches that I'm working with and listening to this, they'll know I in all my reports I put this big in red lighting saying it's an estimation. It's a lot more imprecise than speed, because with spin, I'm a bit of a trade secret in terms of when you're tagging this. You almost got to find a spot in the ball and create a marker on it, and then the software's got to evaluate every time it sees it. And it's very imprecise because it loses it. It's a small mark, it loses it. So again, I think to get the RPMs or spin per second is imprecise. But we do collect it. Some coaches are happy with it. I usually put it to them saying, I don't think it's completely accurate, but this is what it compares to. Often they'll have a look at Hawkeye numbers that they're already aware, and they go, okay, it's close enough, let's use it. Some coaches are like, no, let's exclude it. But that's a bit in terms of my use of spin. Its value it's incredibly important. So where I've been fortunate enough to be on a Hawkeye court and got the spin data, it was really critical to work out the effectiveness of certain patterns. So just knowing direction, just knowing speed is sometimes it's not enough. And you look at a player like just a tour example, someone like Rafael Nadal, you can get if you didn't have the spin data, yeah, or you didn't know that there was spin impacting that sort of pattern where he goes to Federer's single-handed backhand, you couldn't explain what was going on. It's a spin that explains why it's jumping out of Federer's hitting zone. It's above his shoulders. That's why he struggled with that shot. That's why so many single-handers struggle with Nadal on clay. But without spin data, you couldn't quantify that. So, for me, it's incredibly important. It's an area that I think smart courts are going to be very important for coaches and players to get that insight, because there's nothing other than that gives it accurately at the moment.
Yeah. And now when you mention Nadal, so obviously he has an insane spin rate when he's hitting, and what I've heard from different coaches that many players are trying to replicate that, and sometimes even with that it wouldn't necessarily make sense to try to replicate it, because there's so many variables in place that it can hurt the player himself who's trying to replicate that. And so just like going back and a little bit deeper on that. So with your players, so ideally if you get the Hawkeye data and a good accurate spin data, so what are typically the conclusions that you should use it more or hit more flat, or and what kind of situations and what is there some general levels? What is a good level for forehand or backhand, and or does it again depend on your opponent? But like, how do you generally measure or benefit from the spin data with your players?
Yeah, I think a general part of it is with any of the analysis, I'd say, and this is an arbitrary number I'm plucking out, but 80% of the analysis is on your player. So what their strengths are, what their weakness. So the analysis is based on that, and then maybe around 20% is based on the opponent. So you never want to have the whole game plan or the whole analysis on the opponent, because your player might not be able to execute it. So I'm just setting the scene with the response with that. But then, if you would use spin data, so if let's say a particular, you'd look at the range of spin your player can actually hit. So it might be, let's say, 2,800 revolutions might be between there, and 3,100 might be their range. For a particular opponent, it might mean let's play a bit flatter. Let's go around that 2,800 range. So you could articulate that saying, take a bit of, you don't have to hit with your full range of spin. You can flatten it out a little bit and go like that with this opponent. With this other opponent, you might go, you need to hit heavier, and you go towards that 3,100 sort of range. So again, working within the capabilities of your player. So you do need to assess your player quite well. So often in that training where possible, if you can get that smart court data, that Hawkeye data under training, you can get a good baseline of how they play, their ranges, their speed, their spin, all of that range. And then when you go into a match, you can sort of articulate, this is the range you should be playing with this player. And it differs from, first shot, you go heavy, push them back. If they're further behind the baseline, 2-3 meters, then flatten it out, take spin off it, and then go pace. So it might alternate. Tennis, like you said, is a complicated sport. Like, it's not one size fits all. So depending on the situation, looking at the court position of the opponent, you might go more spin, less spin.
Yeah. And I think that I haven't heard that before. Like when you said it, it's a very concrete advice that, you shouldn't apply your game plan 100% depending on your opponent, because you might not be able to execute it. That was a really, really good observation. And that, as tennis is so complex sport and has so many variables, so I think that for mainly our listeners, the finding the easy low-hanging fruits, like the general ideas, might not apply always, but like I personally think that some of the key findings from data can already help in general. Don't need to apply every time, but like even if you would get some kind of aha experience and learning from data, that can immensely help you with
Yep.
any opponent in general.
Yeah, definitely. I think collecting the data. There's a lot of data that I collected on arrangements that I don't use and I haven't used for 12 months, but then later on I'd also use as well. So maybe the first focus of ours may have been looking at the serve. When once we've sort of got the serve a happy place, we'll go, okay, you know what, we've collected data on the forehand before. Let's have a look at the forehand now. So yeah, collecting the data is really important. I know I'm a little bit biased in that way, given my role, but having the data there, it may be useful at some point. So I think it's critical.
Yeah. Then the third one you mentioned was the movement. How do you measure movement, and what are the metrics? Is it acceleration, change of direction, or how much you do run around forehands? Like how would you slice down the movement part, and what are critical aspects there, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, a bit of everything you've said. So you would definitely, again, you'd with a lot of the tagging softwares now, you can track objects. So you sort of track the player, and you'd get sort of their movement data based on that. But yeah, you would look at sort of the distance covered by the player. You'd look at things like where they moved. You'd tie that in with whether they're serving, whether they're returning, was it a second serve, first serve? So you can get a really good understanding of their patterns in terms of movement. One of the things that I sort of do on top of, and in training, I can use a GPS device for this as well, but you can use your tracking sort of software as well, where you're looking at speed zone entries. So a player might enter, I won't go through all the categories, but above 36 kilometers per hour is considered sprinting. From 24 to 36 is high intensity running. So one of the things that we do, we collect data and we observe how often our athlete gets into certain running zones, and it's a good indication of whether our player can, are they entering the higher intensity running zones when they need to later in matches. So if they're not, if you're noticing that they're incapable of getting to those speeds, then there's a fitness issue that you need to work on. But yeah, but it's also an interesting way to sort of the load management as well. So in tennis, a lot of the movement is in that sort of, I think, 6.1 to 12 kilometer range. Like speeds, you go up and down a bit, but a lot of the running is in that range. But there are some really high velocity requirements at times. So you need to make sure you've done the work, the training to be able to do that, so you don't get injured. So again, using the raw data, you can sort of calculate those things, which again, in that big block at the end of the year, that's where a lot of this side of analysis gets focused on. You're going, okay, our player wasn't doing this well enough. What can we do to get them to do this better? Because you got that big block of time to do that.
Excellent. Last two questions. First one is that if you get the basic stats from a match that you see on TV, like points won, serves, all that, what is there, like for the general audience, let's say someone who doesn't necessarily play tennis but watches tennis, what are in general your top three metrics that you would focus on, and why?
Yeah. From those general statistics, and I know lately they're starting to present the 0 to 4, the 5 to 8, and the 9+, which I think is quite important. But that's probably been maybe the last 12, 18 months. Before that, I always like to look at second serve points 1 and second serve return points 1. I find that's a good health check on how the match is going. Particularly in the last decade, where tennis courts are a bit slower. I think, or grass is slower. The hard courts are slower, so the ability to defend your second serve and attack your opponent's second serve is a key area that for me is more correlated with, if you're winning those areas, it's more correlated with winning than not. But yeah, you look at some of the other breakpoint opportunities is a good one to look at. Are you creating opportunities? Are you taking them? And where they've presented, I know they're starting to present, some of the serve directions, the tee, the body. That's something I look at as well. Yeah, I think they're probably
on the last one. Do you think that it's is it the if your player is playing and serving on the tee or wide out, is it typically the impact of their serve, or is it their own credit if they win points more serving on the tee, or is it more on the returner? Like, both obviously play, but if we oversimplify and just look at one performance, is it more that it's the player's goodness that he's doing good, or then is it more on the returner side? That which one applies more if you would need to pick one?
Yeah, I would say on the first serve, it's probably more the server, and the second serve is I'm leaning more towards the return, particularly in the women's game, more the returner's error. Then, if I had to pick one, in reality, it's probably a bit of both.
I know, but that's a very good generalization. Again, like first serve, it's more the server, and second serve, it's more the returner. Makes perfectly sense, actually. And then, have you had any learnings from other sports recently? And your view on where, obviously you mentioned the one that there are more data analysts now than there were 2 years ago. And where is the tennis industry going, and what can it learn from other sports that might be doing things differently, what tennis is doing now?
So one of the things I'm fortunate enough to do, I have a role in Cricket Australia, which is, I know it might not be a huge sport in Finland, but it's a sport similar to baseball that we play in Australia. It's a global sport, but a lot of the Commonwealth countries play it. So I have a role in there, and there's an analyst there's a data scientist, and there's performance analysts as well in the team, and they're collecting data on themselves, their opponents, at the international level, but at the lower levels as well, the grassroots, and the aim, is to really enhance the sport, not just from maybe the high performance, but from a policy perspective as well, to go, we're losing players at the age of 13, 14. Do we need to change the rules because, they're not scoring enough runs? Or so using data sort of from that angle as well. And I think, cricket's doing it well. With you probably, the NBA and baseball in the US, they collect data at the college levels. It's at such a high level, and the data is readily available as well, which has enhanced the sport and the understanding of the sport, and helped coaches as well. Tennis, I think, has been very, very behind in this for a couple of reasons. It's only seemed, certainly if you look 2-3 years ago, it's only seemed at that top level that that Hawkeye data was available, and the data was owned by each of the tournaments. So it wasn't owned by necessarily the ATP or the ITF or the WTA. It was owned by each of the tournaments. So there was not a lot of data sharing and availability. So it's just, it had made it quite challenging to do some of that sort of deeper analysis, sort of week-on-week analysis, because it was either very expensive or not readily available. So that was the top level. And then the lower levels, they didn't really have a lot of access to smart courts at the time, which is, I think, now slowly changing. You're seeing a lot more sort of in college tennis, there's a lot more sort of devices. You're seeing Probably in the last year or 2 years, you're seeing a lot more optical tracking solutions as well. So you're no longer just having just video or data separately. You're kind of getting both, which is I think a critical part to get that whole picture for a coach and a player. And that's also, now you've got a lot more baseline data, like maybe 2-3 years worth of data that people have collected that players can use to evaluate how they're going. So it probably doesn't answer your question fully, but I think the tennis industry is getting better there's more data available now. So players are no longer, there's less guesswork, and they can have access to data a lot easier.
Perfect, makes sense. And the last bonus question is that is there some brilliant tennis mind you think I should interview for the next episode or the following episode? Someone that you've learned a lot from and has been an inspiration for you?
Yeah, look, I've learned from a lot of people. I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's it's definitely worth getting a couple of coaches on the show. Maybe one of the coaches that I work with, Mark Safoulis from Australia. He's a high performance coach in Australia. He does a lot of the Tennis Australia coaching education. We've worked together with, I think, maybe 4 or 5 players. So a very good relationship with him. He loves using data. He leaves the analysis for me, but he once the analysis is done, we get together and we come up with game plans together. And yeah, we've had a bit of success. We worked with the junior boys doubles team that won the Australian Open. So I think it's probably a good case study on someone that's willing to challenge themselves and use something that they two years ago he wasn't using any data. And in 2 years' time, he's not only brought an analyst into a lot of the coaching arrangements that he's had, but he's learning to capture data. He's looking at GPS trackers and things like that. That's something that he was never thinking of previously. He's now on board with. So I think he'd be a great someone to get on the show, just so you maybe understand his journey and why he's looking at using data a lot more.
One question that comes to my mind regarding the global current situation. So how do you see your role next year working, or the few years to come, working with players, and the impact of this situation in general for tennis and data, and do you think that it will have an impact or no?
Yeah, I think it'll have a little bit of an impact. What this year proved, though, for me was I can do 95% of what I can do from home. It just means my hours are a little bit hard. So when Ons was playing Roland Garros and playing the US Open, the hours were late for me. But I can do all the preparation work, the analysis, and get it to the coach, speak to them, and then it's doable. I feel like you lose a little bit by not being with them court level and hearing. You lose maybe some of that assessment. But again, for me, it's fine. But I'll maybe like you kind of lose a little bit of the passion, sort of being away from the team. Like if you're in the team, the vibe is there. You lose that by not sort of being there with them. But yeah, I think if I had to work I'm fine sort of doing it this way. I think maybe some of the coaches that couldn't travel, that's hard for them. I think with players that didn't have coaches in some events, they did worse generally. I think with an analyst, you can, as long as you get your time zones correct, you're fine, I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shane, for coming to the show. Brilliant observations and key learnings. I'm sure that our viewers will enjoy it as well. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thanks for having me. Yeah, really enjoyed having the chat, and I look forward to coming back to Finland in the next couple of years for sure.